So, Liz, I am as we jump into our chat, our visit, let's say,
Yes.
because it's been a while since everybody's been visiting, and everyone's busy too. That I just want to kind of give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. We're going to, of course, have your formal biography available for folks to see on the websites and on the YouTubes and everything like that. But I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, how you would like us to know you.
Okay. I'm Liz Howard. I'm of settler and Anishinaabe descent. I'm originally from a small town in northern Ontario called Chapleau, which is in Treaty 9 territory. And I moved here for university when I was 18. And I completed my undergraduate degree in experimental psychology and at the University of Toronto, and I received a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Guelph, and I wrote two collections of poetry, Infinite Citizen of the Shaking Tent and Letters in a Bruised Cosmos. Wonderful, you have your copy there. Excellent. And yeah, and I now live and work as a poet, editor, and educator.
Wonderful. And when you say here, you mean Tagaranto, you mean that
Yes.
that territory. So okay, I didn't know that you had done some schooling there as well. But that's kind of leads us right into the first thing that I wanted to chat with you about, and that is, because you have had so much of this kind of formal, quote unquote, formal training in these different areas, and then you kind of throw in the fact that, oh yeah, and I'm a poet, and
Yes.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, and I write that poetry stuff too. That it makes me wonder, what has all of that kind of formal study had as an influence on your writing, but also too, what hasn't all of that formal study been able to teach you as a writer? What have you kind of learned on your own or discovered on your own?
Certainly. Yeah. Well, I sort of view, quote unquote, higher education as, what brought me down south to the city, away from my really isolated hometown. And at that time, I was really driven by a desire for knowledge. And I was particularly interested in the human mind, how it operates, the degree to which it can be figured out, how the different sort of like neural structures, the brain stuff sort of works together to generate, experience and memories and perception and so on. And I am still sort of deeply influenced by that foundational education in science. I still use a lot of, scientific terms and jargon, also, anatomical terms and terms from medicine and even across the sciences. I find the sounds of those words very exciting. I know some people have a difficult time with them when they come across them in poems, that they can sometimes feel as if it's a little restrictive, but it's my hope that the unusualness of the word and its appearance or its sound can sort of transcend that initial sort of um, non understanding. And then I did 2 years of master's in creative writing, and I got to study under incredible people like Dion Brand. Margaret Christakis was my thesis supervisor. I got to work with Lisa Robertson, who's one of my favorite sort of like living writers. So that was an incredible experience, and I learned a lot from each of those people, from each of those poets, in different ways, how to express myself lyrically and touch deeper into um, different emotional resonances connected to my personal experience, and how that can be evocative of larger, socio-political concerns and struggles. But what I didn't really learn necessarily in these formal arrangements was how to be deeply connected to myself and my own writing in a way that is grounded to land, and grounded to a sense of deep interconnectedness and extension throughout space and time. Perhaps we could call it the spiritual. And this is something that I feel was always present in my work. From a young age, I always seemed to be in touch with something that was somehow outside of myself, but was connected to the place where I was, the land in Northern Ontario, and was connected to ancestors and was connected to the people who were around me. And I learned more about this through being connected with the poetry community, and especially the Indigenous poetry community. Deeply grateful for that.
Yeah, no. What a unique, and it becomes more and more difficult these days to make something that's unique or identify as something unique, because we're all kind of in the same, riding that same wave. But how I'm wanting to use the word in reference to you, Liz, is with all of that training and all of that influence that you have, I'm wondering if you have discovered that, in so much as we endeavor to find those elements of and relationships within erotica and spirituality, especially in Indigenous context, I'm wondering if you've been able to find a language almost, or a hybrid of a language, which encompasses both your scientific psychological language and the Indigenous language, whatever that means to you, if you've been able to kind of like make those things have a relationship that's meaningful to your writing.
Yeah, certainly. And I think the term that you used there, hybridity, is one that's very important for me, and I would say very highly characteristic of my work. And I sort of see, especially in these two collections that have been published, that I adopt what's called a two-eyed seeing approach, in which both Indigenous ways of knowing, and knowledge systems and knowledge histories and traditions are considered with equal weight and discernment alongside Western philosophical and scientific perspectives. And I think that's also a really important item. It's an ethical position for me, and it's also an existential position for me, because I am a mixed person myself. And I'm in a process of reconnecting, but I also of course have experienced and continue to experience a degree of white privilege in the world, and especially in the kind of formal education that I've been able to access sort of one way or another somehow. So yeah, I'm always striving for equal representation and weight and presence, but also allowing moments of hybridity. And there are moments when, these perspectives are not at odds with each other whatsoever. Right?
Yeah. I mean, if I can say that, what I have find in your writing is that the Indigenous identity of it stands so strongly on the page. It's like there's no excuse, there's no apology, there's no halfway about it. What I see and what I hear in your writing is someone who's strongly rooted in that Indigenous identity. And that's what touches me so much about your work and why I'm such a fan. I'm not saying that to blow smoke. But, you know, I think you probably know by now, Liz, I'm a fucking
Thank
huge fan.
you. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
The next thing I wanted to chat about was so in case you missed it, in the headline of Liz's bio is that Liz's first publication, poetry collection, Infinite Citizen and Shaking Tent, won the Griffin Poetry Prize in 2016. And correct me if I'm wrong, you were the youngest, or are you at odds with another Griffin Poetry Prize winner who thinks they're the youngest to have won that prize?
I was at the time.
You were at the time.
But now I believe like official Billy Ray Belcourt.
Billy Ray's the youngest.
Is the youngest.
Is the youngest to have won. Amazing. And then also your second collection, Letters in a Bruised Cosmos, was shortlisted for the same prize just last year in 2020, in 2022.
Wild.
So yeah, like this is amazing, and again, like all such well-deserved recognition. So when you realize that, okay, the scope of the eyes that are on your work, the level of recognition that you're getting with this work, how does it affect you as a writer moving into, it's like now you have the hit album, can you make the next hit album? Was that any part of the concern or underlying method or way of writing the second collection?
In general, I'm always trying to push myself to my absolute. I'm always pushing myself right up against my limits and testing them and see if I can possibly break through. It's not a method that I would advise to everyone because it can be, really difficult and sometimes soul destroying. Whether or not the result is worth it in the long run is maybe, I don't know, maybe for me to decide, sort of later on. But so far, I've been really sort of fortunate to have received the readers, right? The readers that I've received. And for some of those readers to be in a position to, confer these sort of honors and recognition upon me. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the second collection, it took me quite a few years. I think there's about 6 years. Yeah, 6 years between. It took me a really long time. I mean, it was wonderful and so unexpected, the success of that first book. It's truly changed my life and changed the trajectory of my life before the book came out and after, immediately sort of like graduating from this MFA program. I was, working, I could only sort of like secure part-time employment in a research lab. I was really struggling financially. It was really, uncertain as to what my future was going to be, or sort of like my next step in my life. I accomplished one big goal. My main goal was just to publish a book. I wanted to publish a book and have it out there in the world as an object, right? To share with people. And I had achieved that. But when I won this prize, I then was sort of in this whirlwind for a couple of years of being invited all sorts of places to read from and discuss my book, and these other opportunities came through, which were incredible. But there was also backlash, right? There was also criticism, right, of my book that it was a political choice. Yes.
That old chestnut. That old
chestnut. Yeah. And a number of people of a certain type, would sort of like come up to me and sort of like grill me about this. And then also in general, sort of, and maybe sort of less horrible and gross, people would always be like, wow, it's incredible. Your first book, did so well. Are you nervous? Are you having a hard time, writing the second one? There's, going to be so much like scrutiny. Like, is it going to be as good as the first
Yeah.
one? Like,
Yeah.
how are you feeling? And I'd be like, of course, like of course I feel, the pressure, like um, I of course like realized all of that. And I felt sort of like, I don't know, more of a sort of amorphous public sort of critic now, sort of like looking over my shoulder as I was trying to write, like, does it stand up? Is it,
Oh,
so
wow.
on and so forth. And so after a few years, I just sort of like reconciled myself to saying like, it isn't going to measure up. It's not going to be the same. And I feel as if it's already been decided that it
Yeah.
couldn't possibly be as good or do as well or whatever. And in that way, like, it gave me complete freedom. Like, then I
Mm,
was totally liberated to do sort of whatever I wanted.
mm.
And then this other sort of like mode of writing sort of took over, some of which was, tied to, different events that had happened in my life
Mm,
that um, allowed me to connect with a voice that was more intimate,
mm,
that was more direct,
mm,
that was more about um, like communication, sharing, and storytelling.
mm.
And I sort of like felt as if like I gave myself permission to put that out there as poetry, and not everything had to be, you know, at turned up to 11,
Mm.
in terms of linguistic play and reference, like many of the poems in my first book.
Mm. That's a great setup. And you use the word different and expecting, and yes, the next our next pieces should be different, otherwise we're manufacturing our own you know craft. We're manufacturers of ourselves. So different and doesn't always necessarily mean worse or lesser than. Different is
Yeah.
just different. And so thanks for evoking that word. Which really brings me to the next question. You've set us up nicely here. Is that so? Being a fan, I randomly opened the collection and it fell upon the piece titled True Value,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know. I'll let you describe what that piece is. But my question about this piece is that, my default about anything that has high risk personal content, such as this piece, it
Yeah.
made me go to, oh, is Liz addressing missing and murdered Indigenous women, or is this something more personal? So that is actually my question to you.
It's in fact both.
Okay.
It is personal, and it is about, a personal experience, and something that is connected to larger issues
Mhm.
that women, and especially Indigenous women, like, face under, like the so-called justice system. I mean, not to even give, voice, to the particular horrors of what happened, in the case of Cindy Gladue.
Yeah.
Um, but even in my personal case, um, the strategy of the defense is to, like, bludgeon the witness, is like to break down your resolve, and to damage your character, so that you will be deemed a quote unquote unreliable witness. So the poem is speaking directly to that experience, but in a way that is not detached, but factual.
Mm.
There's a kind of ferocity, in a sense, or coolness to the voice. And in the end, there's a sort of, not necessarily a triumph, but a like a reclamation.
Mhm.
Um, of personhood and voice, where the speaker at the end says, I broke the line.
Right.
And you can see sort of, if you look at the poem itself, it operates on like very short lines, and the lines are heavily enjambed.
Right.
So it's also kind of like meta. It's sort of like self-referencing.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like that faux conversation one has in a courtroom.
Yeah.
That back and forth. It's like a court theater.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got that. So thank you for that. And then our final question here, we're just chatting for a bit here, but the final question was, Liz, I've always wondered if you ever had an idea or a want to move your work into something off of the page, be it audio or visual or performance.
Definitely.
Oh,
Definitely.
cool. Oh, I'm
And I
happy to
feel
hear that.
that for most of my poems, and people will express this to me, like after seeing and hearing me read, that the poems come across so much better when they're performed. So many of
Yeah.
them are meant to be performed. These aren't necessarily spoken word poems,
Right.
in that tradition, but there is a performative aspect to a lot of the poems, and that was um, something always intentional on my part, but also, like many poets, I got my start on, open mics,
Oh,
like
yeah.
here in Toronto, there's like a series called long running series called the Art Bar, and they will have like 10 or 15 open mic slots at the end of the night. And that's where we would all go to, practice our poems and hear each other. So I, would enjoy that performance aspect. But
Have you
yeah,
been
I've
have
always sort of desired to work with audio somehow, but I lack any sort of technical know-how. But perhaps in the future,
Yeah.
uh,
We don't necessarily have audio books for poets. It's always the
yeah,
novelist. It's those darn novelists.
yeah,
They get that kind of shine.
occasionally, like
Yeah.
occasionally.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we should have more.
We should have more. Yes. And I think there should be a whole label, at
Yes.
least one label dedicated to that, bring that, let's make that,
I
make that
love
happen.
listening to poets
Yeah.
read.
Oh,
And
yeah.
especially when I was younger, I would download entire readings from sites like um, there's a place called like Penn Sound. It's associated with Penn University in the States, and they
Nice.
have like, I don't know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of mostly American poets. But you could download a 45-minute reading, right, of
Right.
like of Alice Notley reading in 1980.
Oh, wow. How wonderful.
And
How
so I
wonderful.
would like put that on my iPod or whatever, and I'd listen to that over and over again, and I'd walk around the city, and I'd let like the rhythms of the poets, prosody, intonation, and speech
Nice.
sort of merge with the rhythm of my walking, right, as I'm walking through the city.
Very
And
nice.
that, yeah, that was pretty formative. And I recommend like that sort of a practice to my
Yeah.
students and to anybody
Oh,
really.
that's a great thing to recommend to people. I mean, I was, before that, I was the discman. And when I first got my
Yes.
disc or the tape, the Walkman with the tape. And when I
Yeah.
first got that and started to listen to music while I was like roaming around the city of Toronto, because I was in Toronto for 13 years, everything became a music video to me. So it was like, oh, everything seemed to work together too, which was kind of a
Yeah.
joy
Yeah.
to discover. But what is next for you?
Well, like like creatively,
Yeah, creatively, professionally, personally,
professionally.
anything.
Well, I recently was profoundly, exceptionally fortunate to accept a position at Concordia University as an assistant professor. So I'm going to be teaching poetry to undergraduates and graduates starting this September. So I'm going to be moving my whole life to the next province. So I'm in the process of that now, but I'm very excited, and I have a couple of projects in the works. One is a poetry prose hybrid weirdness called The Confessions of Electra Russo.
Electra Russo. A character? Oh,
sort of, yeah. A character.
Okay. Oh, sort of a character. Okay. All right. Good.
So, yeah. A character who's also myself, or versions of myself, or a possibility of self.
So great.
It's weird.
Well,
it'll be interesting if I can write it. I'll write, something. If it will be as interesting as it is right now in my head. Okay. It remains to be seen.
Okay.
But I'm working on it.
Good. Bring the weird. Bring it.
Bring the weird.
Yeah, we're ready for it. We can
letting
do it.
My freak flag fly.
There you go. And you know what? Montreal's gonna love you, Liz.
I hope so.
Oh yeah. I could see you doing quite well thriving over there. Absolutely.
For love and community and good things.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, that's our time. Thank you so much for making time with us.
Thank you so much, January.
A pleasure.